Alrighty. Yeah, thanks everyone for joining me today for the EO 2020 Canada Regional Virtual Summit. Today's topic for the presentation is measuring marketing for MSPs. And if I figure there's probably some attendees who are not MSPs, and there should be some good takeaways for you regardless. So before we get into the meat and potatoes of the presentation, I just want to tell you a little bit more about myself and about EBridge Marketing Solutions. We are a boutique marketing agency serving MSPs and other IT service providers, including data centers, web hosts, infrastructures as a service providers, vendors, and really anyone who plays in that ecosystem. We were established in 2001, so almost 20 years experience doing this, and for myself, almost 7 years. And we are a full service marketing agency covering the full gamut of marketing tactics, both online and offline. And so if you have any other questions related to marketing today that aren't necessarily pertaining to my presentation, feel free to fire away. I can probably address them. So, the impetus for today's presentation really came out of a conversation I was having with an MSP. And we were discussing some different marketing tactics that might be suitable for them. And they expressed a little bit of frustration with me and said, Devin, I just feel like today with marketing that it just requires such a leap of faith. And really what they were getting at is that it is difficult to track the results of marketing. And this is especially true for MSPs. And I will describe a little bit more about why. And I understood the sentiment, and it is especially the case for MSPs, where the entire industry is really based around having predictable monthly recurring revenue, and so that's what they would like to see out of their marketing as well. And unfortunately, today it is very difficult to actually track marketing returns reliably. So it doesn't really address the MSP's desire for that predictable monthly recurring revenue. But that doesn't mean that it's all bad news. There are some things that we can be tracking. It's just this elusive ROI figure that so many MSPs want that is very difficult to land on. So why is marketing so difficult to measure these days anyway? Well, one of the biggest reasons is privacy trends. Today's buyers are increasingly privacy conscientious. And when I think about this, I think about like Silicon Valley and people who work at social media companies in Silicon Valley, i.e., like the most technically savvy and most social media savvy people. Well, these people are also known for like being very privacy conscientious. For instance, they don't have their kids on social media. They don't want to be sharing their lives on social media. And I think it's a very similar thing for MSPs, where the people that you're trying to reach quite often are technically savvy themselves, and are privacy conscious as well. There's also a push for more legislation. We see this most notably in Europe with GDPR, but also in Canada and in California, there are specific privacy legislations that have gone through. And this is something that I don't see stopping anytime soon. Frankly, I would be very surprised if North America, or at least maybe just United States of America, don't have their own equivalent GDPR soon. We're going to see increasing legislation because there is demand for it. And also there's privacy tools with increasing adoption. So the most notable ones that impact marketing are things like VPNs, which make it really difficult to track where people are coming from and to track different sessions. There's ad blockers. There's encrypted chat. Facebook likes to read your Facebook Messenger and serve you ads based on what you're talking about. You obviously can't do that if your target is chatting amongst themselves on Signal or whatever. You're not going to be able to track that. And also, maybe the biggest one is web browsers increasingly are offering privacy tools out of the box, whether it's blocking cookies or ad trackers or whatever. And all those things make it much more difficult to track your marketing and what's happening after you've reached somebody and what they're doing on your website and if they're completing a purchase and all that stuff. Another big factor that plays in for MSPs in particular is complex sales cycles. Increasingly, you're not just selling specifically to a technical person. There might be a marketing person that needs to be involved and have their needs taken into consideration. Same with finance, etc. So the more people you have involved in a purchase decision, it is more complicated to track it. This is especially true during coronavirus, where we have people working from home. You used to be able to track a little bit more about at the office level by maybe tracking what people are doing by IP. You can no longer really do that, especially right now. And these people in multiple locations are using multiple devices too, whether it's their laptops, their cell phones, etc. So these are all complicating factors which make it more tricky to track the revenue from marketing activities. But it's not all negative. There are some good things that most MSPs could be tracking. So for most MSPs, I would say almost all of them, basic website analytics is something that they should be doing. I actually did some research on this recently, and I looked at 50 top MSP websites, of which 47 of them had Google Analytics installed. That is definitely the most popular analytics tool. We recommend it at EBridge because it's free, it's customizable, and it's pretty powerful as well. On the right side of the slide there, I have a screenshot just showing some basic metrics from Google Analytics. And right out of the box, you can track things like how many users there are, the sessions. And really what I like to look at the most is the engagement numbers. So that's the pages per session, the average session duration, and the bounce rate. Those are the numbers that are really going to give you a good idea about the quality of traffic and if people who are arriving on your site are actually interacting with the site. And just to give you a little bit of maybe a frame of reference here, these numbers on the right, the engagement numbers, are a little bit on the low end. For an MSP, I would probably expect the average session duration to typically fall between 2 or 3 minutes. Pages per session, probably closer to 2.5, maybe 3. And the bounce rate, 70% is not bad, but you'd probably want to ideally be closer to 60%. But these are all numbers that are important to track. And that's out of the box of Google Analytics, but you can actually layer on a whole bunch of customized options as well. Of particular relevance for MSPs is phone call tracking. That's obviously very important for a lot of MSPs. And that requires typically a third-party tool that you would layer on to Google Analytics. Actually, it's pretty cool how it works. They assign you a range of phone numbers, and then when people arrive at the site, they're displayed a specific phone number, so you can track that session back to the specific phone call that resulted. And another thing to think about with in terms of what's measurable is almost all of these online metrics have some sort of issue with them. None of them are 100% precise. None of them are 100% accurate. So it's important to look at these as high-level trends. When, like for instance, the average session duration of 1 minute and 11 seconds there, that is just really an approximation based on what information Google has, but they don't have perfect information. So if you were to look at that and take it as, the holy grail of the truth there, it definitely is not. So, looking at that and saying people spend 1 minute and 11 seconds on my site on average would be kind of incorrect analysis, but it's still useful to track it month to month and see what the trends are. And you can tell if you're trending in the right direction. And that's more important than just the actual specific measurement. So what's not measurable for most MSPs? Online activity of leads generated offline is a big one. Offline lead generation obviously is more difficult right now, but let's say, before COVID, you were going to seminars and conferences, and you were collecting business cards and coming home and entering the contact information into your CRM. Finding out how those people actually interact with your website is very difficult to track. You're not going to be able to really know if somebody comes through and submits a form afterwards or anything. And I say most MSPs here because there are some tools that help facilitate this process, but they tend to be a little bit on the pricey end. So they're not really feasible options for smaller MSPs, but for larger MSPs, they can get a little bit more information about what their offline leads are doing on their websites. Brand awareness campaigns are also very difficult to track, and the results of, let's say you're doing a social media campaign targeting local small businesses or something like that. There's definitely value in being seen and getting your brand out there in front of the target audience, but the effectiveness of it is questionable, and you just don't really ever know. There's a rule of thumb it's more for B2C marketing, to be honest, but the rule of thumb is it's 7 brand interactions somebody has to have with you before they'll complete a purchase. For B2B, it's going to be more than that, but the basic thinking there is consistent in that, you want to get brand awareness campaigns to get in front of people. So, you come up when they're thinking about who they should be thinking for managed services. And also what's not measurable for most MSPs is ROI for specific marketing campaigns. So obviously you can track changes in revenue month to month for the business on the whole. But if you're running multiple campaigns, say like on LinkedIn and maybe on Google as well, knowing how much revenue is coming from each is very difficult. So it's kind of hard to know exactly which campaigns are performing well. It was easier a couple years ago, but due to some of those factors that I said on the previous slide, it's becoming increasingly more difficult. So yeah, unfortunately, you never really get great information there, but you still got to deal with the best you have. There are some ways to mitigate these
Devin,
as well. Yep.
Sorry, there's a couple questions in the chat.
Sure. So what is bounce rate, Dawn asked? So bounce rate is when someone arrives on your site and they then proceed to leave your site without having visited another page. So it's generally viewed as people who bounce are low quality traffic because, obviously, let's say someone arrives on your homepage, you eventually want to filter them through to some sort of contact us form or some sort of other page on your site. You want them to interact. If they're not interacting and they're just arriving and they're bouncing, then it's considered usually bad quality traffic or an indication that you need to maybe have a little bit more quality on your website to keep them around. And the percentage of people leave, okay, that's an answer from Crystal. Yeah, exactly. Okay, and yeah, so there are some ways to mitigate the challenges from the previous slide. So, if you want to track the online activity of leads you generate offline, using some sort of tactic that incorporates like coupons, promo codes, or customized landing pages to send people to, like some sort of a way to essentially like assign them like a unique identifier. And for MSPs, maybe the coupon is like a free security audit, maybe it's a free security consultation. That's a good offering. Obviously, it's a little bit easier for B2C companies to offer coupons, but it doesn't mean that B2B companies can't do it too. And then once you know that, they've redeemed this particular coupon code or they've arrived at a particular landing page, you're able to identify that segment and you can gain some information about what they're doing. For brand awareness, you can conduct surveys. Like a good use case would be, let's say, you gather a bunch of business cards from a local conference or something. Then you send them a survey afterwards that asks them to, identify which brands of maybe you and your competitors they recognize the most. That's going to give you a pretty good idea about brand awareness. In like actuality, I think this is probably reserved more for larger MSPs. I feel like smaller MSPs, it's probably not worthwhile doing that. Smaller MSPs probably don't want to be doing a lot of brand awareness campaigns anyway. But for larger MSPs, that's certainly a worthwhile activity. And then for calculating the ROI of specific marketing tactics, I mentioned HubSpot. HubSpot is a good tool for this. There's other marketing automation tools that can help as well, but HubSpot is pretty well known, and they have a little bit more advanced tracking, so they can track a little bit better between devices, between locations, and stuff like that. It does require fingerprinting, so that's kind of an inexact science. But it's better than nothing, and it's does give you a bit more of an idea about the return for specific marketing tactics. Google Analytics gives you some information as well, but it's not as easy to track as it was a couple of years ago. And beyond that, there are other KPIs that MSPs can be tracking too. Really, the big two ones are form fills and phone calls. Form fills, you want to be that's pretty much a lot of MSPs on their websites. That's the main goal, is to get people to give up their contact information so you can continue to market to them. And you can track that quite simply with Google Analytics by adding a little piece of JavaScript to the form. So whenever they click submit, you can track that conversion. I already talked about phone calls. you need a third-party tool. We like CallRail is a good one. They're not too expensive, and it's a very valuable insight to gain. It's another important one. And then there's MQLs and SQLs. And there's a couple different ways that you can be tracking these, either just doing it manually based on the definitions that you've come up with internally. And I should say MQLs being marketing qualified leads and SQLs sales qualified leads. And then there are tools that I mentioned, like HubSpot will have lead scoring automatically built into the tool. So it can automate the whole process of scoring these MQLs and SQLs and determining how many you have month to month. And that sort of a trend is going to give you a pretty good idea about how marketing is performing and affecting sales. Even though you're not able to calculate the ROI, you can at least calculate how many leads have been generated. So really the key takeaways I was hoping to get across today is that you should measure what you can, but just realize that pretty much every measurement online these days is imperfect. There's literally issues with every single one of them. We talked about the bounce rate already. Like that's also an imperfect measurement because some websites, let's say, have a really big long homepage with a ton of information on it. Well, someone might go to that homepage, scroll down, get all the information they need, and then leave the site. That's still recorded as a bounce, even though that's probably a good quality session that you'd be happy about. So it's an imperfect measurement, and there's stories like that for literally every single one of these measurements that you can get. Look at multiple KPIs, not just ROI. That ROI figure is elusive. You're not going to be able to calculate it accurately. So you want to be looking at multiple measurements, whatever you can, not just putting your stock in one measurement. Focusing on trends and not absolutes, because there's issues with every measurement. Don't take it as the truth. Focus on the trends for multiple KPIs month to month. And also just having some good faith that if you do marketing well and you do it over a long period of time and you do it with the most appropriate tactics, you will get results. Even though it's harder to measure these days, the importance of marketing has not gone down. If you're not marketing, especially in a competitive industry like managed services, there are going to be other firms in your municipality that will be marketing their services and scooping up new managed services customers. So if you want to stay ahead of the pack, you have to market. And the way to do that is to have some faith that doing the right thing and doing it consistently over time is going to achieve results, even if you can't necessarily measure the ROI. So that really concludes the presentation today. If anyone has any questions, that would be great, and I can field them. And we, as a full service agency, here's a little bit more information about our breadth of services. And if you have any questions about these services as well, I'd be happy to answer them now too. And there's my contact information should you have any questions after the presentation. Yeah, so Melissa, maybe I'll turn it back over to you. And if anybody has any questions for chat, that would be great.
Sure, if anyone has any questions, they can go ahead and post it in the chat, or they can even just come off of mute and ask Devin directly. We'll also be sending out an email afterwards with his contact information and some ways to get in touch with Devin afterwards.
I'll ask a question. Devin, curious about how EBridge would approach recommendations around KPIs for MSPs. Is it really contingent on the specific sort of needs of that organization, or are there sort of, how do you guys approach? I guess the question is, how do you approach the development of the right set of KPIs for an organization that's trying to evaluate its marketing effectiveness digitally?
I think keeping it simple is the way to go. I've seen some companies that have, like, say, a ton of different conversions being tracked in Google Analytics, like dozens, and it kind of muddies the waters a little bit. So, I mentioned we want to be tracking multiple KPIs, and that's definitely true, but you want to stick to the ones that are kind of common sense ones. So the form fills is really the big one. You know, that's really, you know, obviously MSPs aren't doing e-commerce, so it's not like you can track purchases, but the form fills is kind of the equivalent for MSPs, the main call to action that most MSP are going for. Phone calls, I would say, is a nice to have. There is an additional expense for that, which, you know, it's not a huge expense, but it does make some MSPs shy away from that. And those would be the.
You referenced a company that does that. I missed the name.
Sure, yeah, it's CallRail. I believe it's callrail.com.
Nice.
Yeah. And I would say starting with those two is really the big thing. But then you can layer on others, like say if you have social media buttons on your homepage, you might want to track how many people are exiting the website to go to social media. But you know, you don't want to track things for just the sake of tracking them. So like do it if you're placing an emphasis on growing your social media, yeah, track that. But like if you're kind of just a basic kind of normal MSP, I would say just starting with form fills and phone calls would be a great start. And then you can get more sophisticated from there.
Thank you.
And let's see, so this question in chat, what are your favorite automatic posting services to use, like Microsoft or WatchGuard? Do you mean like social media posting services, or I'm not actually familiar with that posting services as a terminology. For social media posting, if that's what you mean, then no, we like Hootsuite. Maybe I'm biased because I'm in Vancouver, BC here, and that's where Hootsuite is located as well. Kind of the darling of our tech scene, but that's a good one. But I'm sure there's lots of equivalent tools out there. They do offer good functionality, make it easier for you to post across different social networks without you know, having to actually log into each one of them. What KPI is recommended to pay more attention in B2B lead generation campaigns? I would say again, like the form fills, that's the big one. So, well, I guess it depends. So are you doing an inbound lead generation campaign where the goal is to get people on your site or and converting there? Then yeah, I think form fills is the big one. You know, you also probably want to track, you know, say, like what happens afterwards. That was the SQLs, and where are people dropping off in your funnel. But again, it depends. So that's probably going to be more appropriate for larger MSPs and a little bit too cumbersome for smaller MSPs. But those would be the ones I would recommend.
Great. And HK from Omaha, did you want to just follow up on your question?
Sure. Yeah. No, that was a great answer, but I guess what I was kind of asking was by way of like CMX or like via the vendor, because you are specialized, you know, for MSPs. Is there like one particular vendor you find has like really high quality, like automatic posting, like you feed through all of your social media information and they just post for you?
Oh, you mean like a professional services sort of a deal?
Mm-hmm.
Or a tool? I mean, yeah, I mean, well, our firm would be happy to do that for you, to be honest. It's definitely something we do. I will say though that you know, I think social media is not the right solution for all MSPs either. And you know, in a way, like let's say for Twitter, for example,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times MSPs who are on Twitter aren't really getting a lot of engagement with what they tweet and everything. And the times they do get people tweeting at them is when they want support. And that's not really a great look. It's not really what you want. Like when someone has a problem, that's kind of your social media presence is to do with problems. So in a way, you got to watch out for that sort of thing, at least have a strategy in place to route those sorts of support requests to the right agent or whatever. So, you know, I would be cautious. Like LinkedIn makes a lot of sense, obviously, but you know, Facebook, it probably doesn't make sense for a lot of MSPs because people aren't really making B2B decisions on Facebook anyway. It's tempting though, because Facebook does have some nice aspects, good targeting options and everything, but I think LinkedIn's more appropriate. And then Twitter, you just need to be careful. I mean, yeah, you don't want to be just fielding support requests all day instead of actually doing marketing. So Yeah, I would say social media isn't as big of an emphasis as it was like a little while ago too, because even if you're doing things like, you should be writing blogs as MSPs and posting those blogs on social media, sure. But just realize that because social media algorithms have gotten more restrictive with organic recently, that you might not get a huge reach. It kind of is what it is. It's still, it's still worth doing on some channels, but it doesn't make sense for all MSPs.
Thank you.
Well,
Awesome. Do we have any other questions for Devin? Seven seconds of silence as an acknowledgement.
Oh, well, thanks everyone. Appreciate your time and your attention today. And yeah, if you have any questions about measurement for your MSP or marketing tactics or anything, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'd be happy to have a call with you.
Awesome. Thanks everyone.